Good day to everyone. I am Jim Diott. I'm the Executive Director of the University of California, San Diego, Rady School of Management's Master Professional Accountancy program. I would like to welcome you to our annual Master Professional Accountancy Capstone Conference. This year, we are taking a deep dive into how boards, corporate, and policy leaders can work together to create resilient enterprises and communities today. COVID has been a challenge for all of us. After over a year of this challenge, it is clear that some businesses benefited, whereas others have been hurt considerably. We learned the importance of digital transformation, however you define it. We know that it's critical in most cases for businesses to survive. We had access to tools around the university that allowed us to get to know each other, study, and grow with support of colleagues from around the world. Other folks were not so fortunate. Today, you will hear from all of our graduate degree candidates of the Rady MPAc class of 2021. It's such a shame that you'll not have the opportunity to engage with them directly today, but please let me assure you, this is a committed and talented group of professionals with their next stop arriving in our profession tomorrow. We challenged our students to develop a topic they wish to address. The only thing that we asked of them was to make certain it would be of interest to boards, and it just might be covered in the press. Our students easily identified matters that should be on the agenda of boards, whether private enterprise or public. The second demand, that it be covered in the press, was exceptionally achieved. Every single day, the topics our students are addressing are being covered by the global press. I will do my best to highlight a sampling of some recent coverages that actually happened this week, if not today. Lastly, none of this was possible without the support of some outstanding senior leaders from globally recognized firms, including EY, Walmart, RSR Partners, Silvergate Bank, Moss Adams, Oakland Standard, Citibank, and from the faculty of the Rady School of Management. You provided the comfort to our students that they were taking on complex issues that are board relevant, but you also inspired our students to continue to work and improve upon their presentations and create a memorable experience for themselves. My recommendation to all of you in the audience today is sit back, close out your other applications, and put some high quality headphones on and enjoy the conversation that will take place. Our first session today is on accelerating digital transformation through strategic mergers and acquisitions. Digital transformation promises incredible wealth creation for businesses. COVID-19 has shown that those that embraced it earlier grew, while others have struggled. Many companies are wrestling with well, how do you catch up? The question raised by business leaders today is whether they can catch up through accelerated internal investment or a strategic combination with a partner further ahead. Just impress upon the tension out there today. There's an article in today's Wall Street Journal where Google and HCA are announcing an agreement for basically that organization, HCA, to share data with Google to help them out with their artificial intelligence. What's at stake for Google is access to a $3 trillion healthcare sector. The arrangement is complex. I think everybody here in the audience understands that our healthcare records are incredibly sensitive and personal to each of us. So how does HCA and Google arrange something where at the heart of Google is the ability to share information and candidly monetize it, but at the same time, HCA is trying to use this information to make better medical decisions for all of us. This is a complex issue. It's one of whether you build, you borrow, or you acquire this type of technology, this digital transformation that HCA is trying to achieve through a business combination. Our panel will be exploring these issues, including some complex sub-issues, particularly around valuation and risks that are part of an acquisition such as this. Next slide, please. I am very delighted to bring up our first panelist lead, Angelina Zhang, who's going to join us on the virtual stage with her colleagues. Angela, would you take over at this point in time, introduce our colleagues, and perform your presentation?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jim. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Angelina, And like Jim said, today my team will provide you some insights about accelerating digital transformation through M&As in the fintech industry. On our panel, we have Matt Ashdown. He is heading to Moss Adams after graduation as a tax associate here in San Diego. I will join BDO in the corporate tax service line in San Jose. Angela is strong in corporate finance and strategy settings. Paul is our captain. He will be joining EY in their asset management audit practice in Connecticut. Erica, she is currently employed at an international law firm. And Xiaoxing is strong in business management. I've worked with all of them many times before, and I have to say that they're very competent and hardworking people. So I look forward to hearing what they'll present today. The order will be first, we'll talk about how to choose a good target. Then, what's the valuation? How we finance the merger? What are the risks? How to be tax efficient? Then we'll move on to the legal considerations, the positive and negative synergies involved, and how to maintain the edge under the combined entity. As you may have seen in the news, Intuit, the maker of TurboTax, bought Credit Karma, the personal finance company, a year ago for $7 billion. It was a big bet for Intuit. With that acquisition, Intuit was able to unlock smart money decisions and connect its customers to experts instantly with personal financial assistant tools. They were able to use big data to simplify a lot of processes and help customers find better solutions to their problems more efficiently. It really proved the case that it is worth putting together an old school with a high-tech company. This is why we want to do this presentation. It's about whether we can use a tech acquisition to accelerate our companies and how. Okay, next I'll bring up Paul to tell us about M&A valuation and financing.
Thank you, Angelina. I will be covering valuation and finance. How do companies value other companies when looking to make a business combination in the digital transformation space? Next slide, please. The way of the future in business, specifically financial firms, is through digital transformation. As shown by the two graphs, technology as a business entity is in high demand and has increased significantly from year to year. This movement of digital transformation allowed companies to upgrade their technology and improve their performance. On the left side, the graph by Statista, you can see the number of deals involving companies with machine learning technology. From 2010, which sits at 3 total deals, to 2019, that sits at 278, you can see large and constant growth. Companies are looking to increase effective technology to save them resources like time and money, as well as increase revenue. On the right side is a similar graph from PwC showing the number of deals involving AI technology, which shows similar things to the graph on the left, allowing us to draw similar conclusions that it is in fact the direction that business is moving, and it is crucial that moves be made to stay competitive or even alive at this point. The graph on the right also shows you the deal value is rising, which can be attributed to the high demand at this point in time. Next slide, please. So we have determined that companies must digitally advance to keep up with the changing industry and can be left in the dust if they fail to do so. But how can they transform? We pick 2 options. We can either build it or we can buy it. First, build it. It takes a large investment and change of direction by the company and its employees, which can have good and bad consequences. Transitioning a large company takes a lot of resources and would take years to create and implement. In the end, the companies would own the technology and would have an increased specialized employee base. The other option, and the one we think is best right now, looking at all the factors, is to buy it through a business combination. This way, the company will be able to upgrade their capabilities, increase productivity within the current infrastructure, and train their workforce. We will get into this much deeper, but we we must do it for the right price and allow other market factors to influence our decision. Next slide, please. Overall, operating business combination is still in the space, which comes with a lot of questions. Of course, most importantly, what is the correct price? Followed up by, how is the technology valued? Are urgency and risk market factors that can affect the price? How is the transaction best leveraged? Ultimately, this will all go into finding the right price of a company is willing to pay in the acquisition. Next slide, please. So what is our job in the valuation of these companies? Well, even though the technology aspect is fairly new to the market, many of the processes, goals, and roles stay the same. In this case, we are the matchmakers, tasked with finding old reputable banks and other financial institutions and combining them with new technology-based companies through mergers, acquisitions, and other combinations. We want to take the old school and transform it into the new school, combining to allow the old company to accelerate with the new company and upgrade their performance, ultimately creating an optimal plug-and-play scenario that can significantly benefit both sides. Next slide, please. So our first task is to value the company using the traditional discounted cash flow method. It's important to realize here that we are not just valuing the technology arm of the company. In order to obtain the technology, one company must buy the other company. So in this case, we're valuing the entire company. The technology leg of the company will come into play in the due diligence slide. This is the model of what a DCF looks like. We first have to look at the future projections of the company we are looking to acquire. In cases with machine learning and other technology-based companies, you will see a 20% increase in efficiency, which could increase production sales by 20%. I'll show you an example of this on the next slide. Once the yearly free cash flows are obtained, we can plug it into the model using the discount rate of the parent company. We will use the free cash flows, discount rate, and growth rate to calculate the present value of cash flows and the terminal value, which when added together gives you the total enterprise value. Looking at the formula on the left, we see how the financial statement can be used to create this valuation. Other methods commonly used are the market comparison, which compares other transactions and similar companies' EBITDA and revenue multiples. Historical costs can also be used. But we trust and use DCF most often. While this gives us a value, we will use this as a benchmark, which we'll explain in the next slides. Next slide, please. A large part of the final number requires due diligence. Over the last few years, as the capability of these companies has increased and the technology has followed, there has been more focused diligence teams created. This is called integrated diligence approach. In many instances, these include product technology team, financial team, and commercial team, as well as other teams. This goes beyond verifying the financial statements. Each team is responsible for understanding the business. This means understanding the personnel and the assets. Right now, much of the focus is on narrowing the technology to maximize the synergies, which Matt will cover soon. If a parent company cannot execute on the synergy due to a lack of understanding and has to pay for more personnel that was not already in place, then the submitted valuation has to reflect that. Understanding the entire structure of the company and its stakeholders is very important to creating the final valuation. Ultimately, the goal is to project the value the synergies can bring to both companies and what obstacles or costs may be needed to squeeze out these synergies. Being the matchmaker, we are entrusted in doing our thorough due diligence for the parent company and sending out these different teams to research. This creates less risk, which Angela will cover next. Next slide, please. In summary, we come to a final price by the following steps. First, we start with the value of the company through a DCF valuation. Next, we compare synergies achieved and how they are best out in the plug and play scenario for the parent company, which Matt will go into more detail about. Next, due diligence teams will acknowledge and limit the risk scenarios. Once all the legwork is done, it will be time to make an offer. Due to the increase in demand for these capabilities, these offers are typically offered at a premium. Oftentimes, we create an upper bound on the max the parent company is willing to pay. This is calculated based on the increased projections in revenue for the parent company. If the newly acquired company allows the parent company to perform 20% more effectively, then the bound will be created based on the 20% as seen in this illustration. At the end of the day, doing a thorough job will create the best possible opportunity for the business combination to succeed. I will now be passing this on to Angela to cover risks.
Thanks, Paul. I think with Paul's help, you can find a good price to buy your great targets, huh? But on the other hand, I have to remind you of some essential risks or associated pitfalls worth attention in the strategic mergers and acquisition transactions. There are so many different specific risks during the M&A timeline. I will follow the whole M&A process to disclose risks to make sure your buyers and sellers have a successful transaction and a smooth transition period. Next slide. Before the M&A, your board members should consider issues of whether to combine and how to combine. That is, use which method to combine. No matter which method you choose, please note that as a multi-industry or sometimes maybe also a multinational combination, you should have an appropriate evaluation about the acquiree's tech advantages in the industry and its future potential in the tech development. That's what a competitive position in which your acquiree is in the industry. Another point, you need to predict the possible contribution that your target can bring to the digital transformation. That's what proportion will your target contribute, both in the short-term and long-term view. When making the final decision about buying it, build it while buying it, or whether to outsource the whole M&A project, conduct the transaction by yourself, or utilize consultants' help, please balance the pros and cons from the 3 key points: the cost, the needed time, and the final performance of each method. Or some different methods have their own special costs, such as the control cost, the communication and coordination cost, etc. So that's all risks needed to consider before the transaction process. Next slides. Finding a final price and making the decision about using which method to combine. Now we come to the M&A process. To conduct such a huge M&A project, I think the first thing is that we need to hire an outstanding project manager, huh? Our team suggests that the excellent project manager follows the scientific process to manage risks in the M&A project. Next page. Of course, the first step is risk identification. We team identified risks from the 3 aspects: external, internal, and technical. As for external, for a multinational M&A, the government regulation and the legal compliance risks are essential. In the perspective of internal risks, as we all know, cash is the king. Keeping yourself in a fluent cash flow and appropriate financial situation is the most important one, or is the first prioritized risk. In the technical angle, of course, as a strategic M&A for digital transformation, we should make sure that the acquired fintech patents are transformed to update your corporate products and operations successfully. Next page. So after identifying these risks, the following steps are risk hedging or risk optimizing. We all are familiar with the risk assessment and prioritization and risk response processes. So there's no need for me to further explain them. Common risk management strategies are needed to be used here, but besides this, we hope that the excellent project manager doesn't forget the residual risk management. That is managing uncertainty, contingencies, and emergencies. Finally, the documenting and learning should be conducted perfectly, updating the historical documents and accessing the whole M&A project. Well, that's all our team's whole roadmap of the risk management proposal during the M&A process. Next page. Okay, now let's come to the future after the M&A. What will happen after the transaction? What will your big banks be changed by the data transformation? After the successful M&A about the Fintech patents, your corporations will be changed in these 4 levels. You will meet new risks and challenges. First, most apparently, your products and services will be improved a lot. In the level, you have to meet challenges of keeping your applications secure, avoiding online hacking, and making sure your platform is stable. Then Fintech will change your operation mode while you meet risks of the cyber, cloud-based, and data integrity security. On the other hand, you have to avoid the crime of laundering money that belongs to the risk of legal compliance. Following these changes, the market and customers involved too. Customers start to be risky in their digital identity, such as whether their passcodes are safe. The market will keep facing the new inception disruptive technology. In the end, data transformation will influence human resources. After the fintech transformation, highly likely, your corporation should change the human hiring strategy. It will become more data analyst driven and computer talent driven. Yeah, that's the whole horizon about the data transformation from the perspective of risks. Now, let's welcome my colleague Angelina to introduce you to the tax consideration in the M&A.
Thanks, Angela. Now about tax considerations. Tax is typically an afterthought in a lot of the valuation cycles, but we think it should be put in the forefront given the size of the impact it does have on your earnings, especially in the first couple of years of an M&A. To simplify things, really, you are looking at an asset purchase or a stock purchase. From a risk perspective, you always want an asset purchase. Effectively, what an asset purchase does is that you're defining the assets you are going to assume versus in a stock purchase, you're defining the liabilities you're not going to assume. So if you don't know what liabilities that you're not going to assume and you don't write them down, you bear that risk. Currently, on asset acquisitions, you get an immediate step up in value. You have the preference in terms of acceleration of depreciation, and also you pick and choose which liabilities you wish to assume. And that is a big deal. So if you can, do look into the possibility of an asset purchase. Sellers always want a stock purchase because then they'll pay typically capital gains taxes. The question is if capital gains taxes will go up to ordinary income rates, and does it really matter? And if the capital gains go away, it's going to change the acquisition deal flow considerably. So laws are changing every day, and we need to navigate with flexibility. What deal structure did Intuit have with Credit Karma? On their S4, the merger was 50% in cash and 50% in shares of Intuit common stock, with an aggregate $7.1 billion US. IRS Section 368A defines what a reorganization is. It's important because if you're qualified as a reorganization, your transactions can be tax deferred. So these are the four conditions that must be met to qualify a transaction for tax deferred treatment. Continuity of ownership interest, that is at least 50% of the consideration is acquired stock. Do you guys remember what Credit Karma did? 50%. Second, continuity of business enterprise. You must continue the business for at least 2 years after the transaction. Third, valid business purpose, a valid business purpose beyond tax avoidance. And fourth, step transaction doctrine. It just means the tax treatment should be a single integrated event. On the bottom, we can see that there are different types of restructuring defined in this section 368. I will highlight some tax efficient types later. Let's now briefly examine how each stakeholder is affected from a tax perspective. So for the acquiring entity, after a bunch of assumptions, essentially any old tax attributes like NOLs would survive and would carry over to the acquirer. Matt will discuss synergies later in his part of the presentation, but one example of tax synergies we will possibly see is that if the company has significant NOLs, we may want to do a stock purchase instead of an asset purchase. Or if the company takes a PPP loan, we will then have different ways to structure around that. The target would not recognize a taxable gain on the transfer of assets. And for target shareholders, a reorganization is immediately taxable to them to the extent they receive booked. Now, if you're interested in knowing tax-free deal structures in detail, these are the types. Statutory merger. So good things about this is that there's no voting stock requirement. Statutory consolidation. This is where a new corporation is formed and it's appropriate for mergers of equals. Forward triangular merger. The target is merged into a subsidiary of the acquiring company. The benefit is that the acquirer is shielded from the target's liabilities and the acquirer's shareholders do not need to approve the merger. Reverse triangular merger. This has an added benefit to the forward triangular merger of not losing non-transferable assets like patents or licenses. Stock for stock acquisition. This allows the buyer to acquire the target's shares gradually in what is known as a creeping acquisition. Stock for assets acquisition. The buyer can select which of the target's asset it will assume. Obviously, there are more complexities, but the big idea is that it's a negotiation where you figure out what's in the best interests of the two parties to accept which structure of acquisition you will take. Next, I'll bring up Erica to talk about legal considerations.
Thanks, Angelina. So as Angelina mentioned, it's important to review the potential tax implications. However, it's also important to consider the legal side of these business combinations so you can result in a successful transaction. Next slide. So a critical reason why business combinations are not approved by the Justice Department is because there are antitrust legal concerns. There are three main laws that surround antitrust issues, with the first being the Sherman Antitrust Act that outlaws all contracts, combinations, and conspiracies that restrain interstate commerce and foreign trade. And next we have the Clayton Act, which prohibits mergers and acquisitions that are likely to lessen competition. And lastly, we have the Federal Trade Commission Act that prohibits unfair methods of competition in interstate commerce. With that in mind, the main concern is regarding competition. So how do you overcome the antitrust laws? Under the Sherman Act, the act is not violated simply when one firm's vigorous competition and lower prices take sales from its less efficient competitors. That really is the definition of competition. Under the Clayton Act, we consider the allocation of customers or competitors in exchange for receiving protected customers and/or territories. Under the Federal Trade Commission Act, one should not discuss pricing or pricing issues with its competitors, because if there's any evidence that the two or more competing sellers of similar products that have agreed to a price, their products will raise red flags. And next, I will briefly discuss a few fintech business combinations and the resort. In particular, I will focus on Disney and Fox, Visa and Plaid, PNC and BBA, and as my previous colleagues have mentioned, Intuit and Credit Karma. Next slide. An example of a failed business combination is the attempted M&A between Visa and Plaid. So why did they fail this $5.3 billion deal? Their deal was essentially blocked because it violated one of the antitrust laws, as I previously mentioned, as it was seen as an attempt of Visa asking or taking out a rising competitor, creating an unlawful monopoly, and therefore directly having an effect on the market by eliminating a threat and therefore rising their prices, having less innovation and higher entry barriers. Next slide, please. On the other hand, some successful business combinations are as follows. So Disney and Fox, Intuit and Credit Karma, PNC and BBA. Although Disney and Fox are two big competitors, the deal was successful because Disney decided to sell off 22 of Fox regional sports network. PNC and BBA were both similar models and complementary in their franchise. Now, I would like to in particularly highlight Intuit and Credit Karma, one of the most recent successful headliners. Credit Karma was offering additional support to their consumers in their financial journey through digital and AI platforms. By focusing on millennials, which are more tech savvy and make up 50% of their Credit Karma members. Similarly, Intuit has been able to keep up with the digital transformations since back in the early 2000s when it was considered the era of the web. Also, while primarily focused on their consumers' goals regarding finances and this idea of focusing on key trends for growth, adoption of digital expertise, markets utilizing cloud, and etc. have been successful. That being said, there were no major concerns of this business combination violating any of the antitrust laws. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague Matt to discuss synergies.
Thanks, Erica. Hello, everyone. My part of the discussion will focus on synergies. These are the ways in which businesses can add value to one another. Of course, that's in the case of positive synergies. Negative synergies also exist and can easily add unwanted costs when businesses combine. However, there are strategies that can be employed to overcome these drawbacks. My aim is to demonstrate the ways in which businesses can come together and be greater than the sum of their parts. Next slide, please. First up, I'll speak on positive synergies, which can be achieved through the sharing of data and technology. For instance, when two companies combine, each will have access to each other's stores of information, such as their intellectual property. Learning how to leverage these resources can lead to some significant advantages for both businesses. This is especially true with customer lists and customer data, which are often considered to be trade secrets. As you can imagine, this type of information is incredibly valuable and sometimes one of the largest assets a company has, especially for those organizations that mainly deal in online products and services. Utilizing each other's customer data effectively can lead to some significant increases in economic value, either by indicating new potential customers or even opening up new ways to target existing ones. Similarly, with newfound access to each other's technological resources, businesses can help each other to improve their products and processes. As an example, take Facebook. Back in 2012, Facebook was just finalizing its plan to acquire the much smaller social media platform, Instagram. At the time, Instagram had only 30 million users and no model for generating revenue. Some thought this acquisition was a poor decision on the part of Facebook, which ultimately decided to pay $1 billion for the startup. However, 18 months after the acquisition, Instagram's user base had quintupled. 30 million users grew to 150 million. This was all thanks to Facebook integrating Instagram into its own platform. What's more, Facebook implemented an ad-based revenue model into its acquisition, which meant Instagram finally started to make money. And this helped out Facebook too, because it turns out that Instagram ads started to translate into Facebook likes for the advertisers. This is important because it meant that ads on Instagram were actually getting through to customers who then acted on them. And this was happening in an environment where most ads were simply ignored by the user. All this meant that Facebook could improve its advertisement services utilizing Instagram. This example illustrates how two companies can help one another to increase or even start earning revenues. But the same can be true of reducing costs. Next slide, please. When two companies come together, they can pool their resources. Oftentimes, the two will have similar departments performing the same tasks. In these cases, the businesses can combine their respective departments and lay off excess employees, or maybe reduce the number of leaseholds by bringing all staff together under one roof. This is a great way to reduce costs and is often one of the first things that happens after a merger or acquisition. However, companies must not forget to also make use of their partners' expertise and markets. As an example, look at PepsiCo's acquisition of Sobe Mineral Water. At the time of acquisition, Sobe had several edgy product names, such as liquid liposuction. While this gimmick may have worked when Sobe was a small and relatively obscure brand, it wasn't going to do well in larger markets, which is where Pepsi wanted to bring Sobe. Recognizing this, Sobe quickly dropped these edgier product names in favor of safer ones like Sobe Lean. The end result was that Pepsi had a new product it could provide to its customers, a product that appealed to more health-conscious consumers and expanded the Pepsi range. Meanwhile, Sobe gained access to the marketing expertise of Pepsi, as well as new markets and the brand recognition of being a Pepsi product. Next slide, please. So that was positive synergies, where companies add economic value to one another. Now I'll discuss when the opposite is true and business combinations lead to increased costs and other drawbacks. First, let me point out the obvious, that there are no guarantees in these kinds of transactions. Just because two ventures combine does not necessarily mean that their systems will automatically work with one another. In fact, this is very rarely the case. What's far more common is that both organizations will end up spending significant sums changing out, upgrading, and otherwise integrating their IT systems. Then there's the chance that the management team of the collaborating businesses just don't get along, or maybe they have different visions for the future of the organization. Something like this is actually happening right now between Warner Media and Discovery Inc. AT&T, the current parent of Warner Media, just announced that it's going to spin off the company in a transaction that will see it merge with the mass media multinational Discovery Inc. However, the CEO of Warner Media, Jason Kilar, is not too pleased with the deal and is actually now planning his exit from the company. This example illustrates that not everything will go as expected during a business combination. Therefore, it's essential that scenarios like these be considered and planned for when forming these kinds of transactions. Next slide, please. So in business combination transactions, there's a pretty good chance that a number of stakeholders will be upset. There's almost always some sort of legal action taken by a number of shareholders. And this is exactly what's happening in Intuit's acquisition of Credit Karma that my colleagues keep mentioning. After announcing the transaction, several of Intuit's stockholders filed legal action against the company. So far, these lawsuits have gone nowhere, but this is not always the case. In certain situations, and Intuit has acknowledged this possibility in some of its financial statements, these upset shareholders could form a class action together, and that's when things get expensive. Even when the case has no merit, these lawsuits can bring substantial costs in defending against them, not to mention take up a lot of company time and resources. Aside from lawsuits, there are plenty of other negative synergies to be aware of. For instance, as I mentioned before, there is often a lot of destaffing and downsizing that takes place after M&A transactions. While this saves the company's money, it doesn't do much for morale when employees are worried that they might be laid off. And finally, we have to consider that there are going to be business uncertainties. Perhaps customers won't be interested in the new products being offered, or they simply don't want to buy from the partnering company. Next slide, please. So how does one go about addressing these negative synergies? Well, the best way is to try and avoid them in the first place. Of course, this is easier said than done. After all, it's impossible to know everything before a transaction. Sometimes there are little details that simply don't come up until after the deal has happened. In order to minimize these surprises, it's best to make use of experts. Hire a data analyst to sort through some of the information that's provided before the transaction takes place, or utilize modeling and other technology that might give some insight into the other company. Maybe find some consultants that have expertise in the industry and can point out the pitfalls that you need to be aware of. But most importantly, be flexible. Be ready to adapt. If something changes, don't be afraid, but embrace that change. Now, I'd like to introduce Xiaoxin, who will take over the discussion from here.
Thank you, Matt. Next slide. Talking about maintaining the edge, we need to understand what is the new edge and will be created from the M&A process. There is a quote from an article published by McKinsey Company, which is one of the largest consulting firm in the world. They said, treating M&A as a strategic capability can give companies an edge that their peers will struggle to replicate. The key information here is an edge that the peers will struggle to replicate. Next slide. Let's go back to Intuit and the Credit Karma case that we have mentioned a lot of times from this presentation, so you can have a better understanding of what McKinsey means. In this case, the edge that had been created by Intuit and the Credit Karma is data. Sarsan Gordazzi, the CEO of Intuit, said in an interview that what makes Credit Karma the most special is not just the scale of customers, which by the way has not been replicated by anyone. It's their data. Next slide. Let's break down the Intuit and Credit Karma case so we can see why Intuit wants to realize its digital transformation through acquiring Credit Karma and the edge that Intuit was expecting through this acquisition. There are three notable products of Intuit are TurboTax, QuickBooks, and Mint. I believe most of you have heard of these three products. TurboTax is a tax preparation software, and the QuickBooks is a bookkeeping software. Mint is used for budget tracking and budget planning. There are many sources of revenue of Intuit. For example, there's a subscription fee of the softwares, and also the commission of financial related products they sell through these platforms. Credit Karma, on the other hand, is a platform where users can get free access to their credit data and the financial reports online. Credit Karma has solutions for their users who want to improve their credit score for the credit card approval or loan purpose. What's more, they also partner with financial institutions to sell the financial related products to their users through this platform. What's worth mentioning about Credit Karma is it is a completely free platform for customers to use. And how they make revenue is from the commission by selling the financial related products to the customers. But the customers do not pay the commissions. It is the financial institutions that pay them. Since all the features are free and instant to Credit Karma users, and the information they provide are relatively accurate, so they have maintained a very large base of customers, and they can get the financial data from them. Just like Gordazzi has said, it is not just the scale of customer that's special. It is the data behind of these customers that make Credit Karma so worthy. So now understand of the function of these two companies. The acquisition of Credit Karma will give Intuit a very new and competitive edge. Like their CEO has said, They are expecting unparalleled offers on the credit cards, loans, and the insurance. And they will be able to maximize customer tax refund and connect them to high yield saving accounts and the checking accounts. Next slide. Clearly, the edge is very hard for competitor to replicate. Now the problem goes to how can Intuit maintain the edge they created through the acquisition of Credit Karma? We have made some recommendations. First, understand the unparalleled edge, which is data. To maintain the edge, of course, we should know what is edge and we want to maintain. For Intuit, it is data they wanted from Credit Karma. Therefore, it is very important for them to invest in data security improvements. Intuit should make sure that customer data is stored in a very secure manner, and there's also why customer can trust them to input their personal data. Next, which is also the most complicated and the most important step that Intuit needs to perform in order to maintain the edge. It is to maintain the user stickiness of Credit Karma, where the source of data is. There are several steps that we recommend Intuit can do after acquiring Credit Karma. For example, analyze user stickiness stats regularly. Invest in user experience improvements to maintain market share and invest in advertisement to obtain more market share. As we can see from the picture on the right-hand side, user experience is affected by many aspects. For example, the user's interface, usability, functionality, visual design, and the interaction design, and so on. And all these aspects are things that Credit Karma can work on to improve their users' experience so that they can attract more users. At the same time, Intuit should keep track of the performance of their competitors as well. Remember what McKinsey has said, the purpose of this acquisition for Intuit is to create the edge, which is to get the data from Credit Karma, so that its competitor cannot replicate. While doing so, Intuit should also be aware of the antitrust law, as my teammate has presented earlier. This will help them to avoid unnecessary lawsuit costs while maintaining the edge. Next slide. Finally, let's talk about how to maintain the edge from a more general perspective. The M&A deal between the Intuit and the Credit Karma is actually a very good illustration for us to understand how business can accelerate their digital transformation through the deal. For most general situation, there are three processes that we mentioned. We recommend business to follow. First, we need to distinguish from the peers and define what is unparalleled edge that you want to create. You need to know very clearly what you want from the deal. For digital transformation, there are many probabilities. For example, like data we mentioned from the Intuit case. And in many other cases, there could be some kinds of software or technology that business want to acquire to realize the digital transformation. It is not just simply acquiring a fintech company that can help a business to realize digital transformation. It is very important for you to understand what kind of technology you need to make your business become the most special one. And once you know what exactly the unparalleled edge you want to create, you need to understand how the edge functions and make efforts to improve those functions so that it can perform at its best. Finally, and it is also the most difficult step, is to maintain the unparalleled feature of the edge. It may sound very abstract, and actually it is an abstract idea, because those steps involves many possibilities under different situations. Just look back at the Intuit case. The unparalleled feature was the database that Credit Karma can provide them. So they need to protect the database, to utilize the database at its maximum, and to expand the database as much as possible. As you can see, this process can vary a lot from business to business. But what doesn't vary is that the purpose should maintain the unparalleled feature of the edge created from the M&A deal. And then now I will pass back to engineer to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Xiaoxin. So this is the end of our presentation. Hopefully, we have convinced you of the values of digital transformation in an M&A deal. Today, we have walked you through how to value a desirable target. We have warned you of the risks. We've given you suggestions on tax planning, legal planning, and we've explained the positive and negative synergies, as well as ways to maintain your edge. Thank you, everyone. Jim, I'll now hand the stage back to you.
Thank you very much, Angeline. I really appreciate it. And also thank you to Matt, Angela, Erica, Xiaoxin, and Paul. What an outstanding conversation you've given to us today. You know, one of the things that we've heard from advisors as you were engaging with them in the preparation of your materials, you heard clearly that companies really are having a difficulty in valuing their digital assets and even valuing where they are in their relative stage of digital transformation. And unless you gain a strong handle of where you are along with your target, it's going to be very difficult to achieve, as Matt had shared, those synergies that you're counting on in the purchase price of the company. So really an outstanding effort, colleagues. I really appreciate the effort that you've done on this. This concludes our webinar. I want to thank those who have joined us today and hope everyone enjoyed this fantastic presentation. We will be posting the webinar for on-demand replay in the very near future. If you're interested in the presentation materials, please reach out to us at Rady, and we will make arrangements to share the presentation with you. On behalf of our students, our faculty, and all the people at Rady School of Management, we thank you for joining us today and look forward to seeing you again in the very near future. Bye now.